Also be reading through the book of John during these 21 days, and we encourage you to hop on one of our sites every day for the next 21 days for a short devotional from one of our pastors. Today we're reading John chapter 1. This chapter covers a few different things. First of all, it covers Jesus being introduced as the Word. And then as soon as it introduces him as the Word, it goes right into John the Baptist shows up on the scene, and he introduces Jesus, says there's one coming greater than I am, and introduces his coming. And then towards the last of John chapter 1, Jesus shows up and he gathers up his disciples. So as I was reading this chapter, I couldn't even get past the first verse, and that's what I want to narrow in on today. John chapter 1 verse 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God." I want to stop right at those three words, in the beginning. What is in the beginning? You have to go back to the book of beginnings in order to understand in the beginning. The book of Genesis, we find that God is the creator of the universe. And it's amazing that we find that God, in order to create the universe, speaks words. So he says, "Let there be sun," and the sun appears. "Let there be stars and moon and sky, dry land," all kinds of things. Everything he created, he spoke through his word. It was so powerful that when anything comes out of his mouth, it comes into existence. The only thing he created that he didn't use words was mankind, but he still kind of did. He formed mankind with his hands, but then in order for man, you and I, to become a living soul, he had to breathe his breath, so his word, his breath into us. So when I read John 1:1, I automatically go back to Genesis chapter 1, where God's powerful word is so powerful. And John 1:1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." If you skip down to verse 14, you'll find that it says, "This Word was made flesh and dwelt among us." So we see in John 1 that this same word, the same powerful word back in the book of Genesis, is the same word that now shows up on the scene, shows up on earth. This word is wrapped in flesh and walks amongst people. It's amazing when you think of it, because if you look at the book of John over the next 21 days, we're going to read the 21 chapters of John, you'll see miracle after miracle after miracle. How did Jesus do those miracles? It was always by the spoken word that come out of his mouth. And how did he have so much power? You know, when you think of Jesus, he stood up in the middle of a boat, we'll find. He stood up in the middle of a boat when a storm's raging all around him. The winds are going and the storm's beating against the boat. The disciples are all scared. And he stands up in the middle of it and simply speaks, simply says, "Be still." And as soon as he said those words, "Be still," all the storm ceased. The Bible says immediately the storm stopped right where it was, and peace was right there. He actually spoke, so he spoke to weather and it had to listen. He spoke to water. Remember in the Gospels, he spoke to water, and the water had to stop being water and become wine, simply because Jesus said, "You're no longer water, you're wine." And so it had to stop. He spoke to a withered hand. A man reached out his hand, and he spoke to that withered hand. And the withered hand, as soon as he spoke to it, had to be whole. It had to be healed. He spoke to blinded eyes, and the blinded eyes had to be open, because his word is so powerful. So what I see in John chapter 1 is that this word that was at the very beginning of time now is prophesied. This prophesied Messiah now steps on the scene. This word is wrapped in flesh and walks amongst people. And that's why he could speak to water. That's why he could speak to hands. He could actually speak to death itself. 4 days later, he spoke to Lazarus and said, "Come forth." And even death had to flee, because his word is so powerful. But the awesome thing about John chapter 1 is, if we'll read throughout the rest of the book of John, he will say towards the end of the book, I don't want to give a spoiler alert, But he'll say towards the end of the book that greater things you will do than I have done. So that same word that was wrapped in flesh, now we have the same power to speak those things into existence. That's the kind of power that prayer is. That's the kind of power that declaring is. We can declare things and see it come to pass. Because through his Spirit now we have been given power, and the same breath of God that breathed into mankind has now been breathed into us, and we've been given that same power. So I just hope you have a great week this week. Make sure you log in tomorrow for day 2 for another great devotion. God bless you. Have a great week.